Hi guys, so today I'm filming an interesting video, to say the least. I mentioned this in a previous video that I really wanted to film my paranormal experiences. Myself and my family have experienced quite a few things that some people may believe, some people might not believe, depending on what you believe in. So with myself, I haven't actually experienced too many individual ones. There are a couple things that have happened that I've kind of looked back on over the years that have happened as a child, like as a young child, that I've sort of kind of thought, that was a bit weird. So I'm going to tell you guys some of them today from my stuff, but basically my mum's, my dad's, my nan's, they all kind of link in together. I'm basically going to separate out the experiences into different sections. The first one I'm going to talk about is our old house, my childhood home. I was there from the age of 5 to about 11 before I started secondary school. I've got a load of pages here to remind me of all the things because there's a lot of things I want to cover. So we lived in a house which was built on top of the Battle of Britain's airfield of World War II. I even learned about the Battle of Britain in my primary school, and that exact airfield is where our house was built on. It was a new home which was built around, I think, 2000, and basically we moved in, I think there was one owner before us. So from our house you could actually see Douglas Bader's offices. They've now been made into apartments, and I hate to think what goes on in that place. It was derelict, it was abandoned, you could see it straight out our spare room window. So you can kind of get the vibe that we were right on history in a sense. There's also another historical kind of moment that we find out later on when we do research after we've experienced certain things, that we also find out about where our house was and where it was situated. So anyway, let's get into the actual experiences that happened in that house. So if I'm looking down, it's because I'm looking at this book. I'm going to start with the spare room. So the spare room was always kind of the room that had the most energy in a sense, and the most experiences happened in there. Little things that happened were we would have our face stroked, our arms stroked, our feet stroked. My mum had her face stroked and her arm. My dad had his feet stroked. I never ever had anything happen to me personally, but I could never sleep in that room. I would never ever be able to sleep in that room when I had friends over. We basically had a bed that came out into two beds, and yeah, I could never sleep in that room, and I always had to vacate to my actual bedroom whilst my friends were around to go and sleep in my own bedroom. My mum and dad would used to tell me that at a young age I would say that there was someone sitting at the end of my bed that was trying to talk to me. They also said that there was something in my wardrobe that not necessarily was trying to talk to me, but was there and it was annoying me in a sense. So that's a little bit creepy. I basically couldn't sleep one night. There are two things that I can remember significantly with my own experiences there. So the first one is that I was trying to sleep one night. I actually found it really hard to sleep in that house, and that might be down to just little kids. You're a bit sort of, what's the word, fidgety, you can't get comfortable, you're in and out of sleep. I don't know if all of us kids were like that, but for me, I never slept really well as a child. So one night I couldn't sleep. I went into my mum and I said, "Mummy, I can't sleep," like blah blah blah, my usual thing that I always did, go to my parents' room. They said go back to bed, basically. So I tried to go back to bed. I couldn't sleep down that end, so I tended to swap ends. Obviously at the time nothing had happened to me at this point, and obviously my parents hadn't told me anything about these paranormal experiences they'd had themselves, because otherwise it would have freaked me out. But I was trying to sleep down that end, and there was a massive tug on my duvet. Now I sleep with my duvet kind of like quite high up, and there was a massive tug and my duvet kind of pulled down a bit, kind of from this part of my head to about here, just a really big tug. And it was quite a sudden movement. It's not like it was like a slow kind of peaking sort of motion. That might have freaked me out a bit more, but it was a massive tug. Obviously I wouldn't have done that. I was lying completely still. So what was it? All I remember after that is that I went back down the other end and I cried myself to sleep because I was so scared, and I didn't want to go back into mum and dad because I knew they'd tell me off. So I cried myself to sleep. I obviously got to sleep eventually, but yeah, ever since then I now sleep with my duvet over my head, like physically over my head, and just literally with part of my face peeking out. I know it sounds so stupid, but because of that, and because of, I don't know, it was just because of that experience, it's now made me really, really kind of anxious to have like part of my face out, or like any of my body in particular, unless I'm really hot. The second thing that happened to me in that house was basically I was home alone. I was probably a little bit older at this point. I think my dad had left the family home then, so I was probably around 10 years old, and I just remember that I was dancing around on one of those like horse wooden sticks round and round the downstairs. Basically the lounge followed into the dining room and then followed into the hallway and then back round again in like a square. And I just remember dancing around, going round and round and round, playing horses by myself as an only child, and I heard banging upstairs in my mum and dad's room. My mum and dad's room was above the lounge, so I thought, that's weird, carried on horseing round. Happened again when I came past the lounge section and I heard walking. And I thought, this is really weird, like what is going on? So I went up to check, and obviously when I went up there was no one in mum and dad's bedroom. However, the tap was running in their ensuite. It was like a screw kind of tap, and it was quite stiff. I remember this tap was quite stiff compared to my one in my bathroom, and so to actually turn it on there was obviously quite a lot of effort to turn the tap on. It wouldn't just come on like naturally, and it was fully running. It wasn't like a little drip or anything. So I mean, they could have left it on. I don't know. I didn't actually tell mum and dad that that had happened to me, because I thought, obviously at the time I didn't think it was anything at all, and it still might not be anything, but it's just something that I've taken from that house that I experienced and have kind of looked back on that might be a bit weird. So another thing in that house, my mum was sleeping one night and she basically woke up to, this is a story that is like only believable if you do believe in that stuff. If you are a skeptic, you're probably not going to believe this. But my mum was sleeping and she woke up to a soldier standing beside her. Bearing in mind my mum's a skeptic as well, so just remember this because she's actually told me this and confirmed that it did happen. Napoleon soldier standing next to her, looking down at her, not evilly, not nicely, just sort of like looking through her in a sense. And she obviously thought she was dreaming at one point, so she turned over, turned back and forth to try and see if it would go, and he would not leave. And she physically said to her, "What are you doing here? Why are you standing there? Can you go please?" If that was me, I would be freaking out. Oh my god. I don't know how she stayed so calm. I'd be screaming if that had happened to me. Like, it was an actual man. She said he was slightly faded. It wasn't like a concrete kind of person, so she knew it wasn't someone that had broken into our home. But still, like, how creepy is that? Obviously it did go eventually, but she actually went back to sleep and left him there. So she just forgot about him in a sense and turned over. This is where it gets a little bit weird for mum. We did some research about the type of uniform that he was wearing. We found out it was a Napoleonic soldier's uniform with the kind of type of hat that comes forward with a pointy bit. We also found out that the Napoleonic soldiers fought on where our house was built. Another thing that happened at this house, my mum and dad were having a dinner party one night. I was asleep already up in my room, and basically they were sitting at the dining room table and they heard running or walking along the landing. We had quite a long landing. It kind of went in an L shape and the stairs ran down. So my dad obviously went to check. He was ready to obviously shout at me because I was up out of bed and mucking around. It sounded like someone was mucking around basically, and not being obedient. So he started walking up the stairs and he came to nothing. He checked me, I was fully asleep. I don't have any siblings, we have a dog, she was downstairs asleep. So another little thing that happened in the house, in the spare room where a lot of the energy activity came from. My dad was in there doing something one time and he basically just felt a presence behind him. He just, you know when you don't feel alone in a sense, he just felt something behind him and he turned around and he basically physically said, at this point he'd had enough. He basically turned around and said, please, can you leave us alone? We don't mind you being here, but can you leave us in peace? So he wasn't telling them to like get out and be really angry, because apparently you're not meant to do that. Apparently you're meant to tell them nicely. He just wanted them to just leave us in peace and to not like affect our daily life in a sense. He actually said, and mum's confirmed this, that the stuff all kind of stopped for a while, but then it did gradually start to build up again. Another thing that was a bit interesting about this house was my dad actually found a bottle whilst he was gardening, and in the bottle there are a load of different objects, different things. He said there were toenails and urine. So he got it tested by an archaeologist and they basically said, yeah, this is a witch's bottle. So they say a witch's bottle is normally used for protection. That means obviously there is the potential that our house was protected by previous witches from centuries ago that were trying to protect the land around us. Other people believe that it is something to do with a curse. So potentially they were bad witches, or you know, there were a little bit of evil going on, and the area was cursed in a negative sense, but you take it how you see it. So in a sense I want to believe it was protection, because I don't want to think that we were surrounded by negativity. However, you can basically decide and believe what you want to. So I'm now going to move on to another house that's involved with our paranormal experiences. We didn't own it, we didn't live there. However, my mum and my nan used to stay there quite a lot when my mum was a teenage girl. Basically, in this house, it is known, I'm not going to say the name of it because it's quite a significant name within the area that I live in, and obviously I don't want you to know where I live as well. So it was known for witchcraft and very unusual parties. So there was a family that lived there, a father, a mother and their 2 sons. Now they held very weird parties, potentially seances, witchcraft, very kind of odd behaviour went on in that house, and apparently the father was quite weird. Oh, it was 2 boys, not 4 boys. I think I said 2, I meant 4. Now, an unusual thing that happened with that family, I know it's not got to do with us, but just the history behind this house. There was actually a fatal accident that happened within that family. The mother was driving home from dropping her son, one of the sons, off somewhere, and on the way back she actually hit a telegraph pole and her head was severed and decapitated basically, and found either on the bonnet or the back seat. We're not too sure because it's just, you know, hearsay. It was found somewhere on the car. So you can think of that what you will. You could think of it as that it was her consequence for messing with potential negativity and potential evil, bad witchcraft, because I know that there can be good witches and bad witches, but maybe she was kind of digging into something that she wasn't meant to, and that could have been her fate. So my nan's paranormal experience, her main one in this house, is quite interesting. She was asleep one night in one of the spare rooms. This was a house that was built in the 1500s, I think she said. And basically she saw what is called ectoplasm. At the time, she had no idea what this was. She describes it as a white cloud or substance that formed in the air, and it just lingered there, and then it disappeared after a few minutes, but it was there for a long time. She said it was in the middle of the night, but she didn't think anything of it, so she went back to sleep. And then a few days later, she goes to the library and she feels within herself that she's guided to a part of the library that she'd never visit. She felt sort of forced, in a sense, to pick up this book from a shelf. She takes out the book, and on the front cover is what she saw, and it basically is a book about ectoplasm and ghosts and spirits and stuff. Now, I've saved these till last because they are extremely not graphic, but quite hard-hitting and weird to get your head around. So these are my dad's experiences as a child. He was actually reluctant to tell me these just because he was a bit scared for other people to know, in case that it would like make them not sleep at night or make them really anxious about the place that they live in or where they visit. Now, when he actually told me these, I couldn't sleep that night. I was sweating, I had to change clothes. I just couldn't sleep hardly at all. So the first thing that there is to tell you guys is that I'm going to read these from my book quite a lot, just because I want to get them like properly right. So he was in his best friend's house, which was located in London at the time. This was when he was a child. They had some friends over, so there was a lot of energy probably still in that room, and they heard a buzzing noise, but they couldn't see the buzz. They couldn't see the fly. But then suddenly a fly appears, but you know how a fly like flies around the room? It wasn't flying like that. It stopped dead in his best friend's track and was looking parallel towards him, and you could see the electric energy going from the fly to the friend's nose, and then a shot of electricity went up in the air, and as soon as it vanished, the lights turned on in the room. Now, this was in the lounge. It was a Victorian house, and it was one of those lights where it's a circle and there's like a little switch that comes out, and you have to physically like kind of, you know, put your finger under it or hold it and then pull it up. Like, that's really odd. Anyway, they don't think too much of it and they go to bed. Now, the next morning, they open his bedroom door and they hear the best friend's mum calling up the stairs, basically saying, "Have you two been messing around?" and trying to play a joke. Now, they walk out onto the landing and they go down the stairs, and whilst they're doing that, they see that all of the pictures in the house have been turned around to face the wall. Oh my god, my heart is racing. He said that no matter if it was on a hook on the wall, that would be turned around, or if it was on a frame in the lounge, like on a mantelpiece, it would be turned around to face the wall. Now, the best friend's dad was a macho man. He wasn't really scared of anything. He basically said that he's always known that there was energy in that house, but he said that they can't let it affect their daily life. But the next experience from my dad is the same family of that best friend moved to an Edwardian house in Kent. He said that they were cleaning out the garage and trying to knock a nail into the wall, and whilst doing so, they see a brick push through the wall and drop onto the floor, and obviously that's a bit weird. This garage was built into a hill, so in theory there should not be anything behind that wall. So they shone a torch through the hole and saw that there was a whole other room with a horse carriage in it, loads of horse bales and horse equipment. Now, they at the time thought that was quite cool. They didn't really think anything of it. They weren't too scared. But then a couple weeks later, he said that they were watching a movie and they went to bed in 2 separate rooms. Now, this is the scariest one in my eyes. I feel for my dad, and he's been scarred by this for life. So he wasn't going to sleep yet. He was just kind of looking up and thinking about stuff, and he thought his eyes were going funny because he thought he could see the light bulb unscrewing from the lampshade. Now obviously to unscrew a light bulb you need to actually physically unscrew it. He thought it was his eyes playing tricks on him, however he realised he was wrong because the light bulb eventually hit his pillow. He had to move his head, his body out of the way, otherwise it would have hit him in the head. But it fell onto the pillow next to him. He was really scared. Obviously at that point he went into his friend's room, they talked about it, they stayed up for a while because they were trying to pass time, but he eventually went back into that room and tried to go to sleep. Now he said that he hardly basically slept that night. He was basically waiting until the sun came and he could get up and get out. The story gets worse when the sun did rise. He got out of bed, and as soon as he went to open the bedroom door, he opened the door to all of the lounge furniture placed and stacked up in front of him and his best friend's door. He said that the furniture was stacked in a way that is just impossible for a human to actually have done it. It was like a heavy sofa at the top, or a heavy armchair, a heavy piece set at the top, and then fragile things at the bottom that if the heavy thing was at the top it surely would have come crashing down. Now I in my mind was thinking, oh, maybe someone sleptwalked into this, but how can they physically bring all of the lounge furniture up the stairs and place it and stack it outside two boys' doors without being heard, without making a sound, without struggle? It's just not possible. And the father of this best friend, that is the guy that isn't really scared of anything, he couldn't make this out. He couldn't think of an excuse or, you know, a skeptical opinion. It took apparently about half an hour for them to move all the furniture back down the stairs. They were gobsmacked, they were scared, and yeah, I don't really know what to make of that story. It's something that you would think happens in horror movies and not actually in real life, and that is why it scares me so much. I have a couple of other things that I could have said, but I wanted to keep it with the main kind of things that happened to us throughout the years. So that is it. I'm feeling a little bit uneasy right now after saying those last ones, because they really do make me a little bit anxious and nervous. I hope I haven't sort of frightened anyone too much, but I've always wanted to film one of these videos, and I've always wanted people to hear my family's experiences. Obviously I've only had a couple myself. I'm sure I will have a few more in my lifetime, but I hope you enjoyed listening to a few of my other family members' experiences. But I do hope you enjoyed this interesting video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.